This one's gonna be deep, so hold on to your butts. The loss of my mom was not the catalyst for my spiritual awakening, but it was the end. When she died, whoever I had become up until that point had also died. My mother in this life had been a Christ incarnation, and I don't mean this just because I was a mama's boy. It was simply the pattern of behavior that she embodied during this lifetime. There are many Christs that are alive today. Most of them are probably mothers. Even my mom's name was Christina. Mothers best reflect the unconditional love and compassion of Christ. To follow the path of Christ, one must dedicate their life to selfless service. This is the path of the heart. In Hinduism, this is called karma yoga, and it is the road that leads to eternal bliss. However, out of all of the possible incarnations that I was most certainly not a Christ. In fact, quite the opposite. I embodied more of the Antichrist, or a fallen angel. For my whole life, I had unintentionally dedicated myself to the opposite of the Christ path, the path of selfishness and pride. And this is the road that leads to eternal suffering. Whenever somebody talks about being saved by Jesus Christ, I never actually know what they are talking about. And when you ask them, they say something like, well, Jesus died for my sins, and so I am forgiven. But I realized through my own experience what this actually means. And so by sharing my story, you shall know too, and also how to deal with great loss. You see, there was a moment where Christ was most separated from God. On the cross, he said, "Father, why have you forsaken me?" And at the same time, when Christ was being nailed to the cross, he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." In his moment of great suffering, Christ chose to concern himself with the suffering of others. But when Satan was cast down from heaven, and in his moment where he was most separated from God, he chose to only focus on his own suffering. He chose to ruminate in hatred and resentment, and was filled with great disdain for the world and humanity. In the same way, when my mom experienced her moment of being most separated from God, she chose to concern herself with the suffering of others. And during this same time, when I was most separated from God, I chose to focus on my own suffering. I remember walking in my house one day and a spontaneous thought arose from my mind, and it said, "Wow, this is the day that I am most separated from God." It was the day in which I had met Satan in myself. I had such an unfathomable hatred for all life. It was not a human kind of hatred, which is often personal, but it was an unconditional and impersonal hatred for everything, for existence itself. And I was prepared to do many bad things. But in the end, there was nothing but one thing that prevented me from acting on this hate, and that was the unconditional love of Christ in my mom's heart. It was her actions in her life that showed me the error in my ways, and it was the strength of her character in death that evoked that same strength in me. It was like one drop of the water of Christ extinguished all the fires of hell. This is what it truly means to be saved by Christ, that there is a right way and a wrong way to deal with the suffering of life, and that through the example of Christ, he showed us the proper way to be, the way that leads to transcendence and resurrection, whereas Satan showed us the way to remain in hell, to stay in darkness. And so a choice had to be made. Was I going to remain in hell and betray the love of Christ? Looking back, I don't think there was ever a choice, because the truth that is Christ dissolves all illusions. It is a light that removes all darkness. It is a love that cures all hatred. And so it sparked a change in me, in which I had to make my way back out of the hard, long road out of hell. Now to where I am today, fully restored, and now I myself am walking the Christ path. You see, the moral of the story is that when we experience loss or are separated from God, the way we think will determine whether or not we will stay in hell or return toward the light. When we choose to focus on the suffering of others, we suffer less. But when we are only focusing on our own suffering, our own pain, then our suffering is amplified. This does not mean that you don't take the time to grieve. It does not mean that you ignore your own pain. It's about navigating the difficulty of life with the right mindset. You use the situation to grow closer to God, not to remain in separation. You fall to surrender and acceptance rather than remaining in resistance. You let go of the hatred and resentment by focusing on the suffering of others who may be in the situation with you. Like a child who has fallen down and gotten hurt, you want to cry out and run toward God, not away from God. During these tragic times of life, the mind is forced to accept the unacceptable, and of course it will refuse. But the mind will not win this battle. The more you allow it to keep you in resistance, the longer it will drag you through hell. During these times, your mind and your thoughts are absolutely your worst enemy. Rather, we must enter into our bodies and allow ourselves to feel these deep and powerful emotions fully. When these feelings emerge and are expressed, they are released. But when they are not expressed, they remain in the body and they wreak havoc in our lives. This is why people are unable to let go of the past, because the past is still haunting them within. Sometimes we have to go back into the past and relive that experience and experience it fully, rather than running away or trying to hide from it or just trying to move on with your life. If you try to move on with your life before it's time, that pain will keep you trapped and will never allow you to move forward. Although I know we would never wish for such situations, these are the greatest opportunities for surrender. We may experience so much pain that we simply can't go on. Everything we thought we knew about ourselves and about life is just thrown out the window. It's like being tossed out in the ocean of chaos. We fall to the underworld, into hell even. From a spiritual perspective, this is a good thing, but from a personal experience, this is a life crisis. But you see, the whole time, our mind has been blocking out the light of God. The mind keeps us in the illusion of separation. These tragic situations in life that cause tremendous suffering, it causes the mind to break down. As it has been said, the cracks in our broken heart are the opening in which the light of God is able to shine through. The more mind, the less God. That is why Satan remains in a state of separation from God. The mind is responsible for the sense of an individual self. So the more we focus on ourselves, being selfish, the more we exist in separation. That is also why when we focus on others, we grow closer to God. God is ultimately like the sun, unconditional warmth and love to all. The sun does not ask anything of the earth in return for the warmth that it provides. It just gives and gives. Unconditional love and selflessness. When we are in separation, we exist in illusion. But when we realize that we are all one, that is when we are living in truth. When you are serving others, you are also serving yourself. But when you take from others, you are also taking from yourself. During these difficult times, we should allow ourselves to be broken down. We use this opportunity to give up our attachments to the mind. In doing so, the presence of God will emerge within you. And when you feel God's presence, you will know intuitively that everything is okay. From your mind's perspective, there is nothing that is okay, but your mind will keep you in hell. And so allow the fire of hell to burn away all that you are not. What remains is the true essence of what you are. Loss presents the greatest opportunity for freedom because it forces us to let go of the strong attachments we have to this world. These attachments ultimately do nothing but keep us a slave to our suffering. God will not allow your suffering to go to waste, but will use that suffering to help bring you back home, back to the light, back to freedom and peace. But you must be willing to surrender your mind and your thoughts, to not hold on so tightly. The selfish mind is like the sacrificial offering to God that allows you entry into the kingdom of heaven. Once you recognize that it is of no use to you anymore, you will give it up freely. And once you truly taste the presence of God, you will give up anything to remain there.